regression. What do I mean by regression? Well, sometimes when you make a change to a bit of software, something seemingly unrelated goes backwards in the software. So some feature which used to work breaks, or some bug which used to be fixed is now unfixed in this new version of the software. Why does this happen? Well, sometimes it's just laziness, a lack of care and attention by the developer. But actually, well, if you look at building as a metaphor for software, we quite often say it, don't we? We talk about software architecture, software design, about patterns, software patterns, design patterns. And this is quite a good analogy because when you're building a piece of software up from the ground, as it gets bigger and bigger, it gets more and more complicated. And it becomes less and less safe and risky to work, and the risk of regression becomes bigger and bigger as you can no longer comprehend the entire whole when you make the small change. Now, how can you prevent regression? Well, obviously, using the basic classic software engineering techniques. You write good, well-factored code. You use good object-oriented design principles. You write cohesive components which are loosely coupled into your application, and yes, you'll reduce the risk, the probability that you'll get regression. But you can't really eliminate it entirely if you want to build big software projects. Just like big buildings require scaffolding, so big software projects need more than just good software engineering techniques. Agile software, we want to embrace change. We want to have software which is malleable, easy to change. We don't have to get somebody who's expert in a particular area. They're the only people which can deal there. No, we don't want that. We want malleable software which is easy to change. So Agile software says we want to introduce techniques and tools which can help prevent regression or diagnose, make it easier to deal with it. So what do we have? Well, one of the big things is automated tests. Yes, you'll hear that a lot, because that's a big agile thing. And the reason for having automated tests, one of the reasons, is that if a feature is well tested, any change which breaks a feature will mean that actually the tests fail. And any bug which is well tested, if that bug becomes unfixed by some change to the system, actually then the developer, by running the tests, will find out about it. And that's where continuous integration comes in, because sometimes developers don't run the tests, or there's an integration problem. What do I mean by that? Well, different code streams, when they're merged together, exhibit behaviours which didn't exist in either stream before that happened. So continuous integration means that actually, yes, on that stream, the continuous integration stream, problems will be picked up like that because the tests fail. Regression is picked up, which means it can be dealt with. Which brings me to one of the big tools, which is version control. You really need version control to build big software, and this is one of the reasons why. Because once your software is versioned, you can actually regress backwards in time. You can go back to previous version numbers where at some point previous in time, if a feature worked, you can go back to a working version. When a bug was fixed, you can go back to that version, and then you can move slowly forward in time to try and work out the single change, the single commit which induced the defect. Now, that brings me to a final point, that if you make small commits, it makes it much easier to work out exactly which went wrong, what broke the tests. If you've got really big coarse-grained commits, in the same way you have big coarse-grained objects, it's really difficult to debug and work out what's happening just from looking at the code or the changes made to the code. You've got to run it and debug it, and that takes a long time, it's much more difficult. So, the moral of the story is, if you want to avoid regression and make it easier to fix regression, small, meaningful commits.